Final Fantasy XIV is a surprisingly ideological game. In my opinion, the best kinds of stories are ones where two opposing ideological forces clash to decide which one is the right way. Unsurprisingly, Final Fantasy XIV accomplishes this tremendously, multiple times over multiple stories. Right versus might, reconciliation versus revenge, responsibility versus hedonism, legacy versus reality. But one expansion, or rather one character, stands out to me as incredibly interesting in the lens of this ideological combat. In the Endwalker expansion, we find a character whose philosophy, ideology, and view of the world I find so incredibly fascinating. Her presence in the expansion as the core thematic answer for the game's central question makes her a prime candidate for this type of analysis. This character is, of course, Venat, or as we would know her for most of the series, Hydaelyn. Venat is interesting to me because of how much there is to learn about her and her beliefs that is in stark contrast to just how little time we even have with her. Where a character like Emet-Selch has an entire expansion and a half dedicated near entirely to fleshing out him and his group's motivation and ideology, Venat, despite technically being in the game from the very beginning, is scarcely seen or even talked about in great depth, even within Endwalker itself. And yet, there is so much to be said about this character and her beliefs. Where do they stem from? What experiences shaped this woman into the deity she became? What is the nature of her ideology and the ramifications of it upon the world? Additionally, Venat is a character who, in the years since the release of Endwalker, has been subject to much and more criticism on not only her ideology, but her methods in seeing them out. Over the course of this video, I hope to find answers to these questions and concerns about a character who I not only find infinitely fascinating, but also incredibly relatable and endearing, and hopefully discover the meaning behind her answer. My name is Morgan, and this is Venat, the Steadfast God. Before we knew her as Venat, we of course knew her as the goddess Hydaelyn throughout most of the story, with an incredibly minor role in the grand scheme of things, considering how important and central she is to everything going on. However, I am still going to spend some time going over our history with Hydaelyn throughout the game. Establishing what little we did know of her prior to her true self being shown to us is important in not only understanding how her ideology and our perception of that ideology shifted over time, but also allowing us to understand the full picture of the character. From the onset, we, the Warrior of Light, are Hydaelyn's champion, bestowed by her Blessing of Light, or Echo, granting us her protection and supernatural capabilities. Hydaelyn is an idea to us in this point of the game, or more specifically, she is our ideology, and her light is what we strive to fight for. The first time she directly involves herself in the story itself is when she shields us from the Ascian La Habrea's casting of Ultima, a spell so powerful that it drains Hydaelyn of majority of her power, greatly weakening her ability to even speak with us from this point onward. And with the loss of our blessing and a quick grab of one Minfilia, Hydaelyn is absent for quite a long time after this. While she is absent, however, she is not off our mind, for throughout Heavensward we are attempting to prove ourselves worthy of being her champion to the dragon Midgard Summoner, and retrieve our blessing. At least this would be true from the in-universe perspective of the Warrior of Light. What is important for us is that, for the player, we still know next to nothing about Hydaelyn, and really can't connect with her or really know what she could possibly believe in. Again, she is more of an idea rather than a real person to speak with. This reality is not helped at all through the scant few chances we have to even speak with her. During these rare opportunities, all she has to say to us is about fighting for the light against the darkness, a general good versus evil JRPG type talk. Luckily for us, this black and white approach to ideology and morality doesn't last very long. Though it's fairly obvious at this point, the team behind the game never really had a grand plan for the Ascians and Hydaelyn, which really shows in these early portions. The first big change to this would come in the post-Heavensward patch quests with the Warriors of Darkness, a party from another world here on a desperate mission to save theirs from annihilation. It is here where Hydaelyn reappears, though not as herself, but as her avatar in Minfilia. This is where we get our first deeper look into what Hydaelyn really is, and start to lay the seeds of doubt in our so far blind faith in her. Pretty abruptly, we learn that the Warriors of Darkness doomed their world by fighting for Hydaelyn, triggering a flood of light that she was unable to stop on her own. This revelation brings some obvious questions. Could fighting blindly for Hydaelyn as they did bring us a similar fate? Clearly, yes, and it seems that Hydaelyn knows this to be true as well. Along with this, she also drops this string of dialogue.
As the Ascians must serve as instruments of Zodiac's will, so too must others carry out the will of Hydaelyn. But for the boon you have granted her, she has grown strong enough to set me free.
Hydaelyn is not a deity above sacrificing others or even entire worlds for her plans. Plans we still know next to nothing about. Doubt in her is intentionally fomented here for purposes later, but at the moment, we begin to see that there is much and more lying behind that veneer she never drops. And while this is jumping ahead slightly, her methods themselves are brought into doubt as well. Why is Ardbert not afforded the death he desired alongside his friends and left wandering an aimless ghost? Would she really just pluck Minfilia out from safety just to serve as her glorified mouthpiece? While these questions do eventually have answers, for the player in the moment, they do not have them, and the seeds of doubt in Hydaelyn are planted. With our time cut short and attention drawn elsewhere, her silence grows even more deafening, and her continued silence throughout Stormblood certainly does not help these growing feelings. If the Warriors of Darkness planted the seeds of doubt, then Shadowbringers would raise them to fruition. This expansion lends very little in the exploration of Hydaelyn's ideological beliefs. It is instead focused primarily on those who are her natural and most sworn enemies, the Ascians, and their backstory and ideological motivation. While the story is meant to give depth and sympathy to the Ascians, it also serves to continue our ongoing questioning of Hydaelyn and her intentions. Important for us here is after the dungeon Kitana Raval, the Scions come across a mural depicting events which Emmett Selk, the leader of the Ascians and an ideological rabbit hole in his own right, describes the world he once knew, as well as its eventual sundering and destruction.
Then share with us the stories you know so well. We are listening.
Before the Great Sundering, there was one world. A world that knew naught but peace and prosperity. Until it was faced with a crisis. Unprecedented, terrifying. Civilization found itself perched upon a precipice, staring into oblivion. But through prayer and sacrifice, the will of the star was made manifest. Zodiac was his name, and by his grace was the calamity averted.
Zodiac.
A savior mighty and magnificent, deserving of reverence and gratitude. One would have thought, yet some thought otherwise. From the fears of these naysayers would rise Hydaelyn, she who was to serve as his shackles, to bind him and hold him in check. And so they fought, and they fought, and they fought, and in the end, Hydaelyn was victorious. With all her strength, she smote him, dealing a blow so devastating that it split the very fabric of reality. And thus was Zodiac banished and his being divided. That concludes today's lesson on long-forgotten history. Though I imagine your mother would offer a rather contradictory account, as is her wont.
It is also here where he drops probably the biggest bombshell in the game's history. that Hydaelyn is not a god, as we had been interpreting, but instead a primal, beings whom killing is quite literally our entire modus operandi for most of the game. Even further, our companion Artbert would after this put forward the worrying possibility that those with the Echo could be enthralled by Hydaelyn outright. If you played the game prior to Endwalker, you would know that these revelations led to all sorts of theories about Hydaelyn being the true villain behind everything, enslaving us or orchestrating her actions to eventually lead to us slaying Zodiark and setting her loose or some variation of that. I mean, why else would the Ascians be made so sympathetic here? Why else would she act so mysteriously with every action we have seen her undertake? Why else would she be so secretive? We still know next to nothing about this supposed god, even though we have been fighting exclusively for her the entire game. Even getting into Endwalker, all Hydaelyn does is show up a couple times and tells you how darkness is coming and something terrible is about to happen, but only leaves cryptic trails to lead you to who knows where, while becoming radio silent during the end of the world. Everything surrounding Hydaelyn is just so unclear that you can't do else but doubt her. What is she trying to say? What are we meant to learn? What is the deal with Hydaelyn?
That was too close. Are you unharmed? Well now, if it isn't a pair of familiar faces.
To gush only slightly here, what an outstanding introduction this is to Venat. The immediate dissonance created between the forever ethereally distant god upon high Hydaelyn we have come to know over the game, and this energetic and adventurous woman jumping headfirst not only into danger, but also a whole new adventure alongside you. Man, the vocal performance for this character in both Japanese and English with Kikuko Inoue and Joanna Roth bringing this character to life is second to none. The sheer emphatic energy coming off of her is palpable.
Huh, you know I am.
I'm sorry, I just had to gush a little about that. So before I get too far off, let's get back on track. Venat in this time as we would come to know her is somewhat of an oddity amongst the ancients. As Emmett Selk puts it,
as I mentioned earlier, the better part of the convocation holds that when we retire is when we return to the star. Well, she is not among said majority. Even after stepping down, she carries on with her work. Venat is her name, and she is the previous Azim.
While the other ancients saw the completion of their goal to signal the time to voluntarily end their own lives, Venat chose a different path, to continue living even after retiring her position on the convocation to her successor and continue her work, for reasons we will get into soon. In our short time with her, we find a woman who is infinitely compassionate to all living things, highly intelligent and able to quickly deduce our time travel shenanigans, curious to a fault much to the chagrin of Emmett Selk, and a highly capable fighter, through the best instance in the game, by the way. All this is to say that Venat is an absolute joy to follow through this portion of Endwalker. There's just something about this warm character that makes you feel at ease with the world, even though you have the knowledge that you are here to try to stop the apocalypse back home. After only knowing Venat as the distant and long since seemingly untrustworthy Hydaelyn, there's just a certain energy radiating from Venat that puts you at ease. This feeling, I'm sure, made many players feel guilty for ever questioning this kind woman in the first place. This is why it was so important for the game to make you feel doubt in her to begin with, so that once you see who she truly was and have those doubts dispelled, you are more open to hearing her out and what she has to say, how she views the world, and what she truly believes in. Speaking of which, upon the high annex of Catesis Hyperborea, you and Venat enjoy a moment's rest. During this time, Venat requests you tell her of your adventures, specifically the little joys that make continuing worthwhile. While this is important in itself, what is of interest for us here is what she says afterwards, when she decides to tell you of her adventures.
you know, I was once a scholar. And among other things, I sought to understand the workings of the world. What exactly is ether? How formed the laws of nature? Whence sprung mankind? Riddles and mysteries beyond counting. Over the years, I have managed to find answers to some few of them. Yet rather than attain a sense of mastery, the more I understood, the more I came to hold the world and its miracles in awe.
Back presumably during her time on the Convocation, the goal she wished to achieve, as all the ancients had, was to uncover the inner workings of the complex world, how life itself worked. And yet, through her research, she discovered something else entirely. The more she learned, the more she discovered what a miracle existence even is. She discovered not just her love of the world and of nature, but of life itself. This formed an instrumental change in her point of view.
We too are miracles, each and every one of us, born of the warm breath of life that traverses the heavens, swirling through eternity. When I fully grasped the improbability of our existence, nothing felt impossible anymore. If it could be imagined, it could be done. A passion swelled within me, an epiphany dispelling all preconceptions of what was natural and true, and a presence without, immense yet intimate, fate perhaps, holding us in its tender embrace. As reassuring as it was intimidating, how keenly aware I became of creation's fragility, built as it is upon precarious happenstance. I was overcome with an irrepressible urge to know the world more intimately, to hear its voice, feel its breath.
Seeing life as the miracle that it is, she concluded that she cannot possibly end her life just yet, because if life is a miraculous event built upon fragile foundation, how could she possibly end it so soon when there is always more to see?
I ventured forth on a journey that very day, so very long ago now. Freed from presumption and prejudice, I saw the world through a newborn's eyes. Everything fresh and new, and so beautiful. Lands that stretched on forever. Skies one could drown in. The heartbeat of nature, silent yet strong. And amidst it all a people, beacons of light and life. Laughter that warmed my heart like naught else before.
Freeing herself and journeying onto the world, she discovered a purpose in living. This was the beauty of the world, and the beauty of all living things upon it. Her purpose was life itself. I believe she put it best herself.
They are my meaning, and my purpose, my love. And so long as they need help, I cannot return to the star.
Endwalker as an expansion asks one core question. What is the meaning of life? A simple question with terrifying but also beautiful answers. And here, Venat tells us her answer to that question, discovered after a long life of research into the workings of reality and a journey across the planet itself. Life is worth living because life is beautiful. In his book, The Birth of Tragedy, Friedrich Nietzsche is highly critical of Socratic philosophy. Socratic philosophy, put incredibly simply, views the problems within life as being solvable by a correct tool or system. Basically, if there's a problem in your life, there is a fix to it, a truth or system which answers your problem and can be used to fix it. Nietzsche believed that this line of thinking would eventually run into a wall when, quote, the optimism essential to logic collapses, and man will find himself staring into the ineffable. He coins the term the Socratic man to describe this inevitability, which encapsulates the philosophical mindset at its worst. The Socratic man is someone who puts the discovery of the truth above all else, who chases the truth in a very detached way, believing that the truth is a cure-all which will heal the world of all its woes. Through this mindset, the Socratic man loses all touch with their aesthetic sense, essentially their ability to see value in things beyond their objective worth. This sense does not abide strictly by reason and logic, and in so doing, they degrade the only true means by which the purpose of life can be explained: beauty. Venat is the opposite of the Socratic man. She is in fact the ideal Nietzschean. She does not see life as having one single value, one single truth to it, and instead absorbs the world through its beauty and the miracle of life itself. This is of course contrasted by another ancient, Hermes. Hermes, or Fandaniel as he will come to be known, is the textbook example of the Socratic man. He is seeking the meaning of life through the pursuit of a single truth, sending messengers, his creations Medion and her sisters the Media, out into the universe to ask distant civilizations a simple question: what is the point of life? He does this because he is unable to find the answer to this question amongst his peers, and he decides to seek the truth from others far disconnected from his society he has such issue with, and he is successful. However, in his Socratic, detached pursuit of the truth, what he learns destroys him. That is that the truth to life is that to live is to suffer, and there is no meaning in suffering. The world of the ancients is by all means a utopia. There is no war, hunger, or even death, as they are functionally immortal. And while their world has their own multitude of problems, which is a story for another time, they live in unequivocal paradise. Though Venat has traveled this world and seen its beauty, she has not experienced suffering. Presumably, her first experience with suffering on a wide scale is from our recounting of our adventures. Remember, we tell her everything. We tell her stories which are mostly rather uplifting, but definitely had some which ended with, and then they died too. We not only told her the smaller details in our one-on-one meeting either, but the entire plotline of the Ascians from A Realm Reborn to Shadowbringers in our larger meeting, along with Emet-Selch and Hythlodaeus. Venat learned the truth of our world and how, despite all the troubles we face, all the loss and suffering, we still see the beauty in life, and how in spite of suffering, or perhaps because of it, we still fight and we still live. Medion speaks of multiple civilizations she encountered in her journey, and how they all met their end in vain attempts to eliminate suffering in the world, and in so doing, discovered that life is suffering. Of the doomed worlds Medion delivers in her report, two stick out to me as the most important.
One race had concluded that finite time was the root of all woes. Aspiring to shatter its shackles, they went in search of infinity. They discovered nothing is infinite, and that neither time or death can be cheated. Disillusioned, they gave up on the future and themselves. One race had discarded all things that gave rise to sorrow, hoping to have only joy. They found joy lost its savor in the absence of sorrow, and lost their will to live.
While the two listed first had taken decisions which led to their destruction, the final two both made discoveries which led to apathy and death. The first civilization, the Ea, discovered the fundamental building blocks of reality and the inescapable truth of the heat death of the universe. They sought this truth above all else, to hopefully find the end of woe. Sound familiar? Not only is this the failure of the Socratic man, it is also shockingly similar to what Venat had been researching before her resignation: the basic building blocks of the universe, the source of it all. The difference between the Ea and Venat is their philosophy on the meaning of life. The Ea, also immortal beings, found the truth of the universe after losing their aesthetic sense, and thus fell into that nihilistic and easy trap of surrender. Where Venat never losing touch of her aesthetic sense, takes this report from Medion with knowledge that infinity cannot be overcome, and does not lose hope nor her love of the beauty of life. The second civilization, the Nibiru, leave the greatest impact upon Venat. While the other civilizations tried and failed to eliminate suffering, and thus concluded that life is meaningless because life is suffering, the Nibiru eliminated suffering entirely. They knew only joy. There was no war, no hunger, not even death. A situation not dissimilar from the society of the ancients. But in the death of suffering, they discovered the selfsame truth that all the other civilizations had discovered, that life is suffering, and without suffering, there is no meaning. Venat definitely took this one to heart, and I am positive pondered on the implication of it for quite some time. In the aftermath of this event, she asks if they, the ancients, were the only ones left who saw beauty in the world, in life itself. This is a clear reflection of her Nietzschean philosophy on beauty. But now she has much and more to question, and we quickly discover her answer. In perhaps the greatest cutscene in the entire game, we are faced with Venat at the end. Her world is devastated, demolished, and overcome with despair. Only 1/3 of mankind remains after being sacrificed to create Zodiark, and now the natural world and all living things upon it are going to be sacrificed to bring back the ancients who have already died. Without any doubt at this point, Venat has now learned what suffering truly is. But it is through your stories, your experiences you shared with her, that has assured her that even through suffering, mankind can prosper, learn, and grow. She has reached a conclusion only one still in tune with their aesthetic sense can reach. That if life truly has no meaning, if the answer truly is nothing else but suffering, then there is only one means by which life can be justified: beauty. Venat confronts the ancients attempting to destroy her meaning, the beauty of the natural world and life she treasures so dearly. The ancients, faced with the aftermath of the suffering at hand, fall prey to restorative nostalgia. This is an all too common real-world phenomenon we see all the time. If only we can return to the good old days. If only we could sacrifice a few lessers, we can restore what we once had. But was the ancients' world truly as wonderful as they believed it was? Theirs was an anti-personal society where death, once an individual's purposes were fulfilled, was the common course of life. A mindset we know not everyone shared through the story of Hermes, a story we will peer into soon. With this, along with a well of darker impulses through someone I swear we will get to another time, you have a society that could have already been on a crash course towards the same apathy and death from Medion's report. The society of the ancients were faced with suffering and failed the test. They clung to the past and could not muster the strength to move forward. But the mankind of the future? They have. They have time and time again. Venat believes in us so readily and is so confident in the Warrior of Light, in our struggle, our future. She makes her decision.
So let there be no way back. From that temptation, I sunder us. No more shall man have wings to bear him to paradise. Henceforth, he shall walk.
If to live is to suffer, then to live, humanity must suffer. It is here that Venat accepts her role as a deity, a god who forces mankind to walk its own path, for her faith in life is so absolute that she is certain that when the future arises, life will be up to the task. And thus, the Heidelin we knew was born, as was her world of suffering. But her faith in her ideology is unshakably absolute. When humanity cries out to their god, asking why they must suffer, why do they live, what is the point, she confidently answers back: to live is to suffer, and in suffering, you find the answer, together. Venat makes a massive decision in the sundering of the world, one that obviously not everyone, either in the narrative or without, would agree with. In the exploration of ideology within this story, one criticism that could be levied on Endwalker is that Venat is too right. She is absolutely correct in her belief that everyone else who has attempted to eliminate suffering met their ends. She is correct that the sundering of the world would allow humanity to interact with Dynamis, a plot thread I have intentionally ignored up until now for the purpose of engaging with her ideology on a more objective basis. She's correct that this would be the key to their success. How can you fairly be critical of a character who is, by all logic of the world of the story, completely correct? However, even removed from the laws of this world and the finer plot devices the story uses to tell its narrative, I am of the opinion that Venat is still unequivocally correct in her ideology and decisions. Venat, in the aftermath of the final days, is faced with two other ideologies. There is, of course, the nihilism of Medion, the bane of Nietzsche that he despised above all else. While nihilism itself is, quite simply, Nietzsche stating that life has no meaning, so humanity must find a less objective purpose, Medion's nihilism is a resignation from life in the absence of meaning. Clearly, this philosophy is wrong. The game believes this wholeheartedly, and so should you. This ideological form of nihilism is one of apathy and death, an attitude of weakness that must absolutely be opposed in every and all cases. That just leaves the ideology of the ancients, one more complex to unravel. For a better look at this, we need to take a look at the struggle of Hermes. Hermes was highly critical of ancient society, specifically their relationship with life and death. For one, the ancients were creators. They cultivated life with their magics to release them into the world. However, when a creation was deemed unfit for release for whatever reason, they would be put down. Hermes struggled with this and his role as the executioner. He struggled with the right they had to judge life as they do. Secondly, Hermes struggled with the common ancient practice of suicide. I touched on this slightly before, but while the ancients are naturally immortal, their life's goal would be to strive for some sort of achievement or accomplishment. And once they have achieved this and have served their purpose, they end their own lives to return to the cycle of reincarnation. This would be like in the real world if after releasing your dissertation, you kill yourself. Hermes struggled with this, especially with the death of his mentor and friend, the current holder of the seat of Fandaniel, who we tell Hermes had ended his life and named him his successor. He struggles with why their society encourages this ritualistic death when the individual feels their purpose has been fulfilled, and doesn't understand why things have to be this way. And for this, he is looked down upon strangely by Emet-Selch, Hythlodaeus, as well as others for these thoughts. He's looked down upon to a point where he truly feels like he is the only one in the world with these concerns. It is these two struggles of Hermes, along with looks into the ancients' darker impulses through the Pandemonium storyline, and Athena, who, while we won't be getting too much into her at this time, was the emblematic example of the ancients at their worst. She saw no point to living beings unless they were controlled by her will absolute and total, used to control all of creation and destroy what she deemed unfit to exist. While Athena and her actions, of course, do not reflect on the entire race of the ancients, they do, however, show where things could have easily gone wrong for them, especially considering the added stress of the aftermath of the final days, where we already see the ancients' disregard for life they don't value come to its natural conclusion. With this information on hand, we can discern that the ancients, by the time of Venat's confrontation, were ideologically anti-personal, anti-dissonant, and supremacist to a point I can only describe as anti-life. Only the lives of the ancients mattered, not the flora and fauna they created, not the lesser beings beneath them. They were only fuel for the fire which would revive the good old days. With retrospect, it seems Emet-Selch didn't just go crazy with time. This is an ideology which is abhorrently undefendable, one so antithetical to Venat that the only recourse she sees is the decimation of their society, a complete and utter rebuilding of its entire foundations. A rebuilding which comes at the cost of countless atrocity, endless tragedy, and a world of suffering. Truly revolutionary. One can easily criticize Venat through asking by what right did she have to make this decision? A decision which affected the lives of millions for tens of thousands of years. A minority decision that went against the desires of not only the majority of the world, but of those who had sacrificed themselves to bring about Zodiark. By what right did she make this choice? To that I say, when does someone ever have the right to bring suffering to others for the greater good? When something is so unambiguously wrong, should you not oppose it simply because you don't have the right to? Is there a line where the decision to bring mass suffering for a greater good okay? I say no. No one ever has the right to make decisions like this. Rarely is there a lost ancient civil code which provides a casus belli for taking action. Individual drivers make decisions based on what they believe is right. There is no great upheaval that doesn't have its detractors, even if those detractors make up the majority opinion. But the choices are still made, and people are forced to live with their results. The question, was Venat justified in her actions, is a personal question. There is no invalid way of feeling about Venat, because the question is inherently flawed. Whether you look back on her and her choices favorably or not depends on your answer and your answer alone. In the world of Final Fantasy XIV, divinity and faith work rather strangely. Faith is a tangible force which draws upon the energy of the land to create deities that are reflections of the faith shared by their followers, such as with the many tribal groups' gods, or the 12 of Eorzea, changing to reflect the literal shifting ideology of worship much of the time. But these gods, or rather primals, are not true deities. They have the strength of gods, certainly, and can enthrall people into their worship, but they do not have divinity as we would understand it. Hydaelyn, while still being a primal just like the rest, is the closest figure to have tangible divinity within this world. Because of the Warrior of Light and their actions in traveling to Elpis, they grant Venat, and thus Hydaelyn, a form of limited omnipotence. While she is not truly omnipotent and cannot predict the future, she knows of the future and knows of events that will transpire. She knows that one day the Warrior of Light will be brought into the world. She knows your story. She knows how it begins. She knows where you will go and what you will do, and can be assured that as long as she has faith in you, that you will find your way to Elpis, and thus back to her. However, she does not know how long it will be or what happens between your departure from Elpis and your birth into the world. So for tens of thousands of years, she is relatively helpless. A supreme deity, the highest and most divine of all gods, but unable to interfere in events transpiring because she knows they must play out. She is bound not only to this faith in you, but also bound to her faith in her own beliefs. She believes unendingly in life, and that the beauty of the world and all the life upon it will endure the suffering she has wrought upon them, that mankind will find its own way, eventually. Though she is a god, her absolute faith in her own ideology is perhaps stronger than any prayer she has ever heard. A god born of faith in all living things, a god sustained by that same faith she holds for tens of thousands of years. I don't believe any character in this story has as much conviction in their ideology as Venat. An ideology so simple and relatable, yet responsible for the most suffering mankind has ever faced in all of its existence. There is no one answer, no single truth about Venat and her actions that can be gleaned from our time spent with her, except that her faith in her own truth and her own answer about life is so absolute and unshakable even after thousands of years of solitude. We already know her answer, and have always known her answer. Thank you for joining me.